especially Americans, especially those of us of a certain age, we grew up in a culture where we drink a lot of juice and soda, and, our palate kind of likes those things, fruit roll-ups. The perception of sweetness can be comforting and nostalgic, but just know that if the fermentation has completed, all of that sugar has become alcohol. Hooray! So welcome back to all my repeat listeners. Now that we've been around for a couple months, there are quite a few of you, which is really exciting. So thanks for tuning in. And if you're brand new to our Sip with Nikki community, welcome. We are so excited to have you here with us. So in today's episode, I am breaking down a topic that comes up all the time, and that is sugar and sweetness in wine. Especially of late, if your social media feed is anything like mine, you are getting these ads for low sugar wine, sugar-free wine, and you're like, what is that? Is that what I should be drinking now? What is that all about? I'm going to break it down very simply today in one of our shorter episodes and just get right to the point. We're going to be talking about what causes sweetness or lack thereof in wine. We're going to be talking about calories and different sources that provide calories in wine. Hint, hint, one of them is alcohol. We're going to talk about different spectrum from sweet to dry and different types of wines that are traditionally made in certain parts of that spectrum. And this is all going to help you to be better armed in making your decisions when you're in the store and when you're in the restaurant. Before we jump in, did you know that you can support this podcast and buy me a glass of wine? I don't care if it's sweet or dry. You can buy our producer, Catherine, a bourbon. That's a whole nother episode as we talk about alcohol and sugar and bourbon, but that's what she loves. Some of you have already done that. Shout out if you have. Thank you for supporting the podcast. There's a link in the show notes to do so. It's super quick. We will give you a shout out, and it allows us to continue what we're doing and cover some of our operating costs. So without further hesitation, let's break down sugar in wine. Here we go. So in order to discuss the topic of sweetness in wine and low sugar wine, we've got to get clear on the very simple process of fermentation, which is how wine is made, and cheese and beer and all the other most wonderful things on this planet. But specifically when we're talking about wine, just remember that fermentation is the process of yeast, whether it's just naturally present on the grapes or if the winemaker's choosing to add a particular yeast. The yeast are eating all of the sugar from the grapes and the grape juice and turning it into alcohol. That is fermentation. So the amount of alcohol that is present in a final wine, once fermentation is dry, and that's the terminology we use. We say it's dry because all the sugar is gone and has been converted to alcohol, right? Once that's done, whatever the level of sugar was in the starting grapes and juice is going to directly determine what the final amount of alcohol is in that wine if the fermentation completed to dryness. Well, how are there sweet wines on this planet, wines with sweetness in them? Well, it comes from a couple different things. First, you can stop that fermentation. Either it naturally just peters out for different chemistry reasons, or you can control that and say, hey, I want to stop the fermentation where there's still a little bit of sugar left. And what that's going to do is two things. The alcohol is going to be a little bit lower in the resulting wine, maybe 11 or 12%. And there's going to be what we call residual sugar, RS. Residual sugar is sugars that's left over. It was originally there in the grapes, and it did not get converted into alcohol. So that's going to result in you, as the person drinking that wine, perceiving some sweetness on the palate. Now, sometimes the fermentation could go all the way to complete, and then perhaps the producer is adding back in some sugar in the form of sugar or grape concentrate or other types of additives. And sometimes that will cause some sweetness. So we say, oh, this wine is sweet. But on paper, chemically, we can measure, nope, there's no residual sugar or, a very negligible amount in there. But yes, sometimes a wine can seem like it has sweetness, and that can be yummy, right? Especially Americans, especially those of us of a certain age. We grew up in a culture where we drank a lot of juice and soda, and our palate kind of likes those things. Fruit roll-ups. The perception of sweetness can be comforting and nostalgic, but just know that if the fermentation has completed, all of that sugar has become alcohol. Hooray! So that leads me to, yes, I'm cheering for alcohol. That leads me to my next point, which is about when you see marketing, when you see, especially now, gosh, my Instagram feed and Facebook feed, especially because of the things that I look at in the line of work that I am, making wine and teaching others about it. I feel like every other day I'm seeing an ad that is promoting low sugar or sugar-free wine. And so something to be aware of, if you think back to what I just explained, is that there can be many wines out there on the market that chemically, if you look at the leftover glucose and fructose, because those are the two main sugars that we look at in a wine, if it's less than 1 gram per liter, which is very, very small, that wine is considered to have no sugar remaining. And that's a lot of wines on the market, especially dry red wines, right? Most of them are going to have under that 1 gram per liter, which means a lot of the wines that are out there are low sugar. It's just not marketed in that way. Because I think, and this is me, vice president in charge of nothing, right? This is just Nikki's view, but definitely in recent years, it's just a trend and it's a focus in wellness to think about these things and to promote and look for wines that are branded as having low or no sugar. My 2021 Sangiovese that I just bottled last November was 0.4 grams per liter of remaining sugar, right? That wine is essentially, we're going to call that dry. Do I have that on my website? Do I have that on the label that it's a low sugar wine? I don't, because I'm not choosing to market it in that way. So I bring this up just so that you can be aware of it. Now, if you're thinking about this because of health and wellness and you're trying to moderate what you're consuming, which is good. Keep in mind that even if a wine has no sugar or, less than 1 gram per sugar remaining, there are going to be calories in that wine because those calories are coming from alcohol, right? On average, a 5-ounce glass of red wine with an average alcohol by volume of 14% is going to have about 120 calories in it. And those calories are coming from alcohol. Even if there's no sugar left, you're getting calories from alcohol. So it's kind of like, well, wait, you fermented all the sugar away. That's good. But now the alcohol has gone up because the sugar became alcohol. And now there's going to be calories coming from alcohol, right? So I just want you to be aware of the different factors in the actual chemistry of wine that cause these things. And then more important, just understand that there is definitely a spin and a focus from the marketing and the advertising world to try to highlight low sugar, healthy, quote unquote, healthy wines. So that's what I have to say on that. Now it's time for a listener question.
Listener question.
So Brad in Florida, he emailed to Nikki at sipwithnikki.com, where you can send your own listener questions in the future. But Brad from Florida wrote in and said, I don't like sweet wine. Am I going to like Riesling? Because I understand that Riesling is sweet. Great question. Not all Riesling is sweet. if you had Riesling, which is a type of grape, and the day you picked them had all of that beautiful natural sugar in there, and you put that Riesling through fermentation all the way to the end where it's dry, guess what? It's not going to be sweet. So it has nothing to do with the grape. It's just that historically, Riesling is a type of grape, especially in parts of the world like Germany. The style that they've chosen to produce that is with some sweetness and leaving that residual sugar in there. But it doesn't have to be that. There is a dry Riesling as well. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes. Riesling is just one that always comes up because the minute people hear that, they say, oh, it's going to be sweet. I don't like it. It's like, well, no, not necessarily, right? I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a great little tip on just Riesling specifically. There is a scale of terms from dry to sweet. They're in German. And I was reminded of this when I was at Walt Disney World on vacation a couple weeks ago, and Michael and I were drinking around the world at Epcot. That episode is coming soon. And when we were in Germany, we went into the beautiful wine cellar, and on the wall, they had this awesome list to remind people of, the different spectrum of sweetness to dryness in Riesling and the names. And it's something that I learned years ago during wine certification, and I probably remember half of them, but not all of them. So I'll put a link in here. So when you are shopping on a website like wine.com, or when you are using that app that I talk about and I love so much, Vivino, where you can scan the label of a wine in the store, right? And it'll bring up all the facts and information. Especially if it's a Riesling, you're going to see some of those terms like cabinet with a K. Cabinet is one example of one of the drier Rieslings. So this concept of sweet to dry really can be applied to any type of grape. It can be other white grapes like Chardonnay. It could be totally dry or have some sweetness. Depends on how far the fermentation went, right? The clue is going to be often the alcohol content, right? If it's really low, 9, 10, 11%, well, cool, means we're going to have less calories per 5 ounces of coming from alcohol, less calories. But it generally means there's probably some RS or residual sugar in there. So again, this can apply to red grapes too. Everything from Grenache to Zinfandel to Pinot Noir and Cabernet Merlot. They can all be produced in a spectrum from sweet to dry. So just something to be aware of when you are on this journey of figuring out what you like, what you don't like, and also just being conscious of how you're being marketed to so that you can make the right decisions for you. So there it is. I hope that you use these tips and this little bit of chemistry to help you in discovering and finding and searching out those things that you like and just making better decisions when it comes to spending your hard-earned money on beautiful bottles of wine. Speaking of, if you would like to try that beautiful 2021 Sollevato Sangiovese that I made, which is 0.4 grams per liter of sugar, the link is in the show notes to visit our website, sollevatowines.com. And if you use the coupon code at checkout, pod listener, all one word, pod, P-O-D, listener, I'll give you 10% off for being a listener and supporter of the podcast. And I can ship that wine to most states in the U.S. Don't forget, if you're enjoying this podcast, and I hope you are, to give us a rating. Most of the platforms like Apple and Spotify have a 5-star rating system. And the more of those that we receive, the more likely this podcast is to be seen by more people, and we can grow our community of sippers. In Apple Podcasts, you can also scroll to the bottom and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review, and that's huge. At the time of this recording, we've got quite a few of them, but we're looking for more reviews again so we can continue to grow and make more episodes for you. And finally, if you know someone in your life who might get a kick out of this or find these tips helpful, go ahead and share the podcast. We would be so grateful. Thanks for listening, and until next time, sip well.
Sip with Nikki is hosted by Nikki Lamberti. Production and sound mixing by Catherine Bryan. You can always send your listener questions to Nikki at sipwithnikki.com or find us on the Sip with Nikki Facebook page or visit us on Instagram at Nikki Lamberti. Thanks for listening. Until next time, sip well, everyone. This is Sip with Nikki, a production of Take 10 Studios.